I'm going to set the context of all this with the backdrop of like, there's been a lot of talk in the Big 12 about Texas Tech and BYU because Texas Tech has a multi-billionaire booster in Cody Campbell, who's gaining a lot of power in the sport in general right now. And then BYU, because of the LDS Church and really like a global fan base. I mean, they have a lot of money to throw around as well. They got AJ DeBonsta, number one basketball player in the country coming in. Texas Tech just landed the number one portal class in football. Are we set up for a world where the Big 12 is going to be run by Texas Tech and BYU because they have this kind of backing? And as that relates to K-State, like where does K-State fit in all of this? Like what? I know that's a really broad-based question with all these different, and it's impossible to predict exactly how this is going to go. But if I just asked you, like, what does the House settlement mean for how K-State will be able to compete long-term moving forward? What's your feel on that right now?
Yeah, so I guess there's kind of two parts to that answer. One is I think if in a revenue sharing world where the rules as written are enforced, I think you feel really good about where we stand because Gene has always made it clear that we're going to be aggressive and that we're going to maximize. We're going to spend up to the cap, which is not something that not every other school in the Big 12 can say. So that already puts you in a strong position. If you, on the flip side, we've talked a lot about how we believe that the enforcement of these limitations is going to be difficult. If you believe that there is going to continue to be outside activity, then I think the answer depends on, what does that activity look like? Is it under the table or is it legal once, if the Deloitte situation goes away? And if it's legal, then I think you probably feel pretty good about it. If it's legal to kind of spend outside the cap through donors, it's probably, I think you probably feel good about where we stand. If it's illegal, I think you just have to, it all will come down to what's the palate of our administration, of our donor base, to engage in some of that under the table activity that we know is going to be going on, that has been going on for decades. Historically, that's not something that K-State has delved off into, but things have changed, I would say, fairly significantly over the last 4 years. And so what does the appetite of our donor base look like to supplement that revenue sharing budget above and beyond that quote unquote cap?
Do you think, and whether or not this is K-State or just other schools, but Jamie Pollard raised the idea of hey, $20.5 million is really hard to come up with every single year. We may need I think it was Virginia Tech that's done an extra student fee that is helping pay some of that. Or obviously a lot of the other talk is you have places I think the Arizona schools are both subsidized pretty heavily by the university. Is that something that you're going to see come into play with a lot more schools because it's just really hard for an athletic department to think about that? A new line item that's $20.5 million every single year and growing, by the way. 100%. We had Gene on, and Gene was just hey, that's going to grow every year, by the way, too.
100%. I think in year, again, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think in year 5 or so, within the next 5 to 10 years, that number is going to be up in the 30 million range or in excess of $30 million, just to show how quickly it's going to grow. And yeah, so the difficult thing is, for smaller departments like K-State, Iowa State, how do you increase your budget by 20-30%? I mean, if K-State generated around $100 million in total last year, now you're tacking 20 on top of that. How do you come up with that $20 million? And so, yeah, that's a tricky deal for a lot of athletic departments that aren't SEC Big Ten across the country. And so, yeah, what support can you get from campus? I think for the past, really since the John Curry days at K-State, we've always prided ourselves on the fact that we are one of very few Power 4 athletic departments that is completely standalone, completely self-sufficient. Well, now how does that, now do you still feel good about that? Or would it be nice to have some support from campus? I think every school is going through that analysis right now, is what can campus do for us? Can we add in some student fees? Can they just kick us some dollars year over year? And I know that's a conversation that's being had everywhere across America, which I guess, again, depending on the place, is not that the answer to that isn't always a simple one. It's not always an easy yes. Universities are struggling in a lot of places. Enrollment has capped or has even begun to reduce in different places across America. And so with campus is struggling a little bit, I think it's really hard for them in some cases to say, yeah, we'll chip into that pool over there. And so, just tricky analysis here. Now, at the end of the day, here, if you ask me, and I think people on the athletic side of the deal would probably agree with this. At the end of the day, a university athletic department is truly its front doorstep. It is the entry point to the university, and without success of primarily football, but other sports as well, that university, I think data will show, will struggle. And with success, with conference championships, college football playoff appearances, that enrollment is only going to increase, and the success of that university is only going to grow. And so the hope would be that campus administrators would look at that particular point and say, yes, I believe that we need to be strong and that we need to have success in order for us to have success over here on campus. And so, yes, we will help you. We will do our part in helping, ease this burden, but it's not always that easy or that simple of a discussion. And so we'll be interested to see how that bears out from campus to campus.
Yeah, I mean, it was always former President John Weefald at Kansas State, Curry, that recognized that football and K-State athletics was the front door to a university and how important that was as well. By the way, it was ESPN had an article with sports economist Daniel Rasher, a subject matter expert who was used in the settlement process. He wrote that he expects that the revenue sharing pot will grow to more than $30 million per year by the time the deal expires. So you were right on there. Also that ESPN article that I read from Pete Thamel over the weekend, Curry noted something you brought up earlier, and those that have shared their budget estimate for what they're going to give via sports, 90% of their money will go to football and men's basketball. So to the point that you made earlier on the men's basketball front, the other thing that's unique about this is we've seen quite a rise in the popularity of women's sports and college athletics in recent years. Just watch Kennedy, a Topeka native, star for Texas Tech, got a reported $1 million NIL deal to transfer to Tech from Stanford. It feels like this is going to particularly impact athletes in those sports for schools that have football that they also have to fund, et cetera. And there's going to be less of a pot to give to women's athletics when we saw the rise in that and all these bigger deals going out. What are your thoughts on that? How do you view it?
100%. And again, school to school, that's going to look a lot different. I think, K-State, and don't quote me on this, but I believe Gene Taylor's intention is to divvy up a percentage of the cap to every sport. So every sport will get something. Obviously, that's going to, this is going to disproportionately affect positively men's basketball and football, but some of our non-revenue generating sports are going to receive a sliver of that cap. Whereas at other schools, they may be supporting 2, 3, 4, 5 sports in total. They may be going football, men's and women's basketball, and that's it. Or maybe a couple other, baseball, volleyball, whatever it may be. So there are sports at schools that are not going to receive anything in a revenue sharing world. And so, yeah, I mean, to my point earlier, Nyjah Kennedy, got $1 million deal this year. Obviously, she's a household name at this point. But if Texas Tech's softball NIL budget is, I guess just think, let's say it's 1% of that cap. So if it's $200,000, even if they spend 100% of that on Nyjah Kennedy, do you believe that she's going to accept a pay cut of that nature? And do you think that other schools are going to say, yeah, we won't do more than that. We can't do more than that. No, of course not. That's just not the way this world is ever going to work. Texas Tech's not going to pay her the $1 million that she got this year. Somebody else is going to pay her the $1 million. So that's the tricky part of this thing is again, how do individual sports, how do they accept these reductions in available dollars? From a revenue sharing perspective, how is that accepted by them, by their supporters, other things of that nature. So it's tricky. They're just, again, there's so many considerations from every single sort of sub issue that you look at. And I think, again, it all comes back to, for me, the conclusion is just, it's going to be really, 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 really difficult for this cap to ever serve as any sort of cap.